Hey guys, tonight we travel thousands of years back in time, to the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, the pharaoh, and perhaps most surprisingly, the scratch of a reed pen on papyrus. You're stepping into the sandals of an ancient Egyptian scribe, ready to endure their meticulous, often frustrating, daily grind. Fair warning, this wasn't exactly a cushy office job with ergonomic chairs and unlimited papyrus rolls. You probably won't survive this without at least a metaphorical paper cut or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Feel the dry, warm air settle around you. It carries the scent of the river, rich earth, maybe a hint of baking bread from a nearby dwelling, and the ever-present, fine dust that seems to coat everything. You shift your weight, the simple linen kilt feeling light but just adequate against the morning warmth that's already starting to build. This is your world now, the world of the ancient Egyptian scribe. It's a world built on tradition, hierarchy, and the absolute power of the written word in a society where literacy was a rare and precious commodity. You belong to a tiny, privileged elite. Perhaps only 1 to 5% of the population could read and write. This wasn't a skill casually acquired. It was the result of years, often brutal years, of dedicated study and relentless discipline. You earned your place, etched it out line by painstaking line on practice ostraca. Being a scribe wasn't just a job, it was an identity, a pathway to influence and a respected position in society, far above the manual laborer or farmer. You weren't just copying texts, you were the living memory of the state, the vital link in the chain of command, the keeper of secrets both sacred and mundane. Imagine the weight of that knowledge, held not in vast libraries as we know them, but often in your own head, backed up by carefully rolled and stored papyrus scrolls. It's like being the central server in a world without computers, email, or even printing presses. Everything of importance, laws, decrees, tax records, temple rituals, medical knowledge, literature, passed through the hands and the pens of scribes. Your office isn't necessarily a single, fixed room with climate control. It could be a corner in a bustling temple complex, filled with the murmur of priests and the faint smell of incense. It might be a makeshift shelter in the middle of a field, protecting you from the relentless sun and the equally relentless sand, which seems to have a personal vendetta against your inkpot. Or perhaps you're stationed in a noisy administrative building in a city like Memphis or Thebes, surrounded by other scribes, overseers barking instructions, and the constant coming and going of people with petitions or reports. Regardless of the location, your personal space is defined by your tools, your wooden palette, stained with the ghosts of countless words, your water pot, essential for wetting your reed pens and mixing ink, your bundle of reeds, waiting to be transformed into writing instruments, and most importantly your rolls of precious papyrus. These simple items are your power, your livelihood, your connection to the very fabric of Egyptian civilization. The air itself feels different when you're attuned to the scribe's life. You notice the subtle shifts in light that tell you the time, the direction of the wind that might whip sand onto your workspace, the faint sounds of distant activity that signal the day is truly beginning. There's a certain rhythm to this world, dictated by the sun, the Nile's inundation cycle, and the demands of pharaoh and temple. And you, the scribe, are right in the middle of it all, the silent, diligent engine keeping the complex machinery running. It's a life of routine, of precision, of endless detail. You are the ancient equivalent of a modern administrator, accountant, lawyer, historian, and librarian, all rolled into one sun-baked package. Maybe throw in a bit of human resources, because you'll often be dealing with people's complaints or requests. It's a lot for one person, isn't it? Makes complaining about your inbox feel a little trivial, doesn't it? Life isn't just about the grand scrolls and decrees, though. It's also the constant, minor battles against the environment itself. The ever-present dust and sand aren't just annoying, they can ruin a fresh line of ink or grit up your carefully prepared pen nib. Flies seem particularly attracted to the sweet smell of some ink pigments, turning your workspace into a minor aerial battlefield. You learned to cover your work quickly, to position yourself just so to catch any errant breeze without inviting a sandstorm onto your papyrus. These aren't things you read about in the grand histories, but they were the daily, physical realities of the job. Historians still argue whether the simplified script known as hieratic, used for most daily administrative and literary tasks, was significantly easier to master for the average scribe compared to the more pictorial hieroglyphs reserved for formal inscriptions on tombs and temples. Some suggest hieratic allowed for faster writing, essential for bureaucracy, while others point out the complexity of mastering thousands of signs in any form. What is certain is that becoming proficient in either required immense dedication and a sharp mind. Your mind, honed by years of rote learning and copying, is your greatest tool. You can recall formulas for letters, standard phrases for contracts, lists of offerings, or passages from religious texts. Your memory is a living archive, supplementing the physical scrolls. This reliance on memory, combined with the physical act of writing, creates a unique state of focused calm, a necessary mental discipline to avoid errors that could have serious consequences. Because a mistake in a tax record or a temple inventory wasn't just a typo, it could mean shortages, punishments, or even divine displeasure. No pressure, right? It's like doing your taxes, but if you messed up, you might upset the gods and get sent to work in the mines. This world of the scribe, your world now, is one defined by the tools you carry and the skills you possess. It's a world where the rustle of papyrus is a familiar sound, where the smell of ink is as common as the smell of the river, and where the simple reed pen is the key that unlocks power, knowledge, and a respected place in the intricate tapestry of ancient Egyptian life. As the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows, the day's demands begin to press. Your toolkit is ready. The work awaits. Your journey into this world wasn't a matter of deciding one day you fancied a career change. It began much earlier, likely as a young boy, perhaps around the age of 5 or 6, if your family had the means and the connections to get you into one of the few available schools. These weren't cozy classrooms with colorful charts and friendly teachers handing out gold stars. Oh no. Think more along the lines of intense, often brutal, apprenticeships attached to temples, administrative buildings, or even the households of wealthy officials. Your early mornings weren't spent sleeping in. They were spent learning to sit still, hold a reed, and painstakingly copy lines of text onto cheap, plentiful practice material. This practice material certainly wasn't papyrus. That was far too valuable to waste on a clumsy beginner. Instead, you'd work on ostraca, which are essentially broken pieces of pottery or flakes of limestone. Imagine trying to write neatly on a jagged shard of a broken pot or a rough piece of rock. It's like learning to draw on a potato chip. You'd spend hours, day after day, filling these irregular surfaces with practice signs, repeating the same characters and phrases until your hand cramped and your back ached from sitting hunched over. This constant repetition wasn't just about muscle memory. It was about instilling discipline, patience, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Errors weren't tolerated lightly. The educational texts themselves often warned of the consequences of idleness or mistakes, and the teachers, often older, established scribes, were known to enforce their lessons with physical punishment. Yes, a mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian schools is that corporal punishment was a very real part of the learning process. Get it wrong, and you might feel the sting of a cane or rod. It certainly wasn't a gentle, encouraging environment. The curriculum was rigorous and multifaceted. You started with the basics, learning the vast repertoire of hieroglyphic signs, their phonetic values, and their ideographic meanings. Then you moved on to hieratic, the cursive script used for everyday writing. Mastering both was essential, though hieratic would be your primary tool for most tasks. You'd copy wisdom literature, hymns to the gods, administrative documents like lists of provisions or letters, and even literary tales. This wasn't just penmanship practice. It was also how you absorbed the culture, the values, and the administrative language of Egypt. You were essentially learning the operating system of the entire civilization, bite by painful bite. Arithmetic was another crucial subject. You learned to calculate areas for land measurement, to tally goods and taxes, and to manage accounts. Geometry was important for construction and land surveying. Some students might delve into subjects like astronomy or medicine, depending on their eventual specialization, but the core curriculum focused on literacy and numeracy, the foundational skills of administration. You spent years in this demanding environment, surrounded by other young hopefuls, competing for the attention, and hopefully, the approval of your instructors. It was a high-stakes game. Not everyone made it through. The dropout rate was significant. Many started, but only a dedicated, resilient few endured the relentless copying, the strict discipline, and the sheer volume of information required to become a fully fledged scribe. It's a bit like trying to get into a top university today, but with less student debt and more potential canings. The teachers weren't just instructors, they were mentors and gatekeepers. They held the keys to a respected profession, and they expected absolute obedience and diligence. You learn not just what to write, but how to behave as a scribe, with humility, efficiency, and respect for authority. The texts you copied weren't just writing exercises. They were often filled with moral lessons and advice on how to succeed in life, emphasizing the superiority of the scribe's life over manual labor. Put the pen to your ear. One famous text advises, meaning listen carefully to instructions, and sit with respect. It was about shaping your entire character, not just teaching you a skill. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on rote memorization in Egyptian schooling hindered critical thinking, or if it was simply the most effective method for transmitting a complex writing system and vast body of knowledge in a pre-printing press era. Was it pure memorization, or did it foster a different kind of cognitive skill? It's hard to say from this distance, but what is clear is that your memory became a finely tuned instrument, capable of recalling formulas, texts, and procedures with remarkable accuracy. Imagine the sheer volume of copying you had to do. Before you ever got to write original documents, you spent years duplicating existing ones. It's like being asked to rewrite Wikipedia by hand, using only a blunt stick on broken plates. You'd copy hymns, administrative letters, literary stories, and even lists of geographical names or professions. This wasn't just for practice. It was also how libraries were created and knowledge preserved. Every copy you made was a tiny act of cultural preservation. It gave you an intimate knowledge of the text, the language, and the structure of written communication. The transition from childhood to scribal life was stark. You traded playtime for practice time, the freedom of the streets for the confines of the schoolhouse. Your hands, which might have once been used for simple games, were now being trained for the delicate, precise work of forming signs on stone and eventually, if you were good enough, on papyrus. The discipline was relentless, the stakes were high, but the reward, a place among the educated elite, was immense. It was a path paved with broken pottery and aching fingers, leading towards a life of influence and respect. You survived the schooling, you endured the harsh lessons and the endless copying. Now you have the skills. But possessing the skill is only part of the equation. You also need the tools. Okay, you've got the mental architecture, the years of discipline etched into your posture and memory, the ability to recall thousands of signs and formulas. You've survived the educational gauntlet, potentially with a few physical reminders from your stern instructors. But all that knowledge, all that hard-won skill, remains locked inside your head without the physical means to translate it onto the page. Your brain is the hard drive, but you need the keyboard and the screen. Or, in this case, the reed, the ink, and the papyrus. Welcome to your essential toolkit, the humble collection of items that are the very symbols of your profession. The most personal and perhaps most iconic piece of your equipment is your scribal palette. Imagine holding it now. It's typically a rectangular piece of wood, maybe 30 to 40 centimeters long, narrow enough to fit comfortably in your hand or sit on your lap. It feels smooth from years of handling, perhaps a bit worn at the edges. Carved into one end are two shallow, circular depressions. These are your inkwells. One is usually filled with a cake of black ink, the other with red. Running down the center of the palette is a long, narrow groove or slot. This is where you keep your reserve of reed pens. It's simple, elegant in its function, and instantly recognizable. This palette isn't just a tool holder, It's a badge of office, a portable desk, and a repository of the raw materials that enable your work. Some palettes were quite plain, purely functional objects, but others, especially those belonging to high-ranking scribes or intended as burial goods, could be beautifully decorated with inlaid designs or even inscribed with the owner's name, titles, or short prayers. Imagine having your name carved into your pen case. It adds a touch of personal pride to the daily grind, doesn't it? This practice of inscribing personal palettes is a lovely, slightly quirky tidbit that shows even in this highly structured society, scribes found ways to personalize their essential gear. And then there are the pens themselves. Forget fancy quills or modern ballpens. Your primary writing instrument is a simple reed, specifically a type of rush called Juncus maritimus that grows along the Nile and in marshy areas. You carry a bundle of these reeds with you. They look unassuming, just hollow stalks, maybe 20 to 30 centimeters long. But the magic, the transformation from a mere plant stem into a precise writing tool, happens through careful preparation. This isn't just picking up a stick. It requires skill to craft the tip. The next section will delve into the nitty-gritty of how you turn this humble reed into a sharp, flexible writing instrument. But for now, understand that these reeds are your pencils, your fountain pens, your keyboards. They are disposable, needing frequent sharpening and replacement, but while they last, they are your direct connection to the written word. You might carry a variety of pens, some with finer points for detailed hieroglyphs or careful hieratic, others perhaps slightly thicker for faster administrative notes or broader strokes. Next up, the ink. You rely on two main colors, black and red. Black is your everyday workhorse, used for the main body of texts, accounts, letters, and literary works. This isn't like the liquid ink in your printer. Ancient Egyptian ink was made from pigment mixed with a binder and water. The black ink was usually made from carbon, essentially soot, scraped from cooking pots or collected from burning materials. This carbon black was ground into a fine powder, then mixed with a binding agent, most commonly gum arabic, a resin from acacia trees. Add a little water, and you get a thick, paint-like consistency that you could then form into cakes and let dry. When you're ready to write, you simply wet your reed pen and rub it on the ink cake in your palette's well, reconstituting the ink to the desired consistency. The beauty of carbon-based ink is its permanence. It doesn't fade easily, which is why texts written thousands of years ago are still perfectly legible today. It's the ancient equivalent of archival quality ink, built to last longer than the pyramids themselves. Imagine your grocery list surviving for 4,000 years because you wrote it in Egyptian carbon ink. Red ink, the other staple, was primarily used for headings, titles, marking corrections, indicating new paragraphs, or highlighting important words or phrases. It provided visual structure and emphasis to the text. Red ink was typically made from red ochre, a naturally occurring iron oxide pigment found in certain types of clay or earth. Like the black ink, it was ground, mixed with gum arabic and water, and formed into cakes. The quality and shade of the red could vary depending on the source of the ochre, ranging from a bright reddish-orange to a deeper, almost purplish red. These two colors, black for the main body and red for highlights, were the standard palette for almost all Egyptian writing on papyrus and ostraca for millennia. It's a simple system, but incredibly effective for organizing information visually. Beyond the palette, pens, and ink cakes, you need water. A small pot or bowl of water is always within reach. This is crucial for several reasons. You need to wet your reed pen before picking up ink from the dry cakes. You need to add water to the inkwells if the cakes get too dry during the day, and you need water to clean your pen occasionally. It's your miniature, portable hydration station for your tools. You might also have a small stone or piece of wood for smoothing papyrus if needed, although ideally, the papyrus is prepared beforehand. A small knife is essential for shaping and resharpening your reed pens throughout the day, a process that becomes second nature. And perhaps a small linen rag for wiping excess ink or cleaning your palette. That's essentially it. Your entire office supply store, distilled down to a few basic, portable items. The simplicity of these tools belies the complexity of the task they enable. You aren't just writing, you're carefully forming thousands of intricate signs, each requiring precision and control. The feel of the reed pen in your hand, the slight drag as it moves across the fibrous surface of the papyrus, the subtle smell of the ink as it dries. These are all sensory cues that become deeply ingrained in your daily experience. You learn to judge the consistency of the ink by how it flows, the sharpness of your pen nib by how cleanly it forms a line. Your tools are an extension of yourself, honed and cared for just as much as your own skills. Historians still argue about the precise ratio of gum arabic to pigment used in the ink recipes and whether there was a standardized formula followed across different regions or periods of Egyptian history. Did a scribe in Thebes make their ink exactly the same way as a scribe in Memphis? Was the quality consistent, or did it vary depending on the source of the materials or the skill of the ink maker? It's one of those details that the ancient texts don't explicitly spell out, leaving room for modern debate based on analyzing surviving ink samples. The constant interaction with these tools shapes your day. You are always aware of their state. Is the black ink drying out? Does the red need more water? Is your current pen nib getting dull? Do you need to prepare another one? This isn't a job where you just grab a disposable pen and go. There's a constant, mindful engagement with your materials, a small ritual of preparation and maintenance that punctuates the flow of writing. It makes the act of putting words on papyrus feel deliberate and significant, not just a casual scribble. You are the keeper of these precious tools, the one responsible for ensuring they are ready when the moment calls for them, which, as a busy scribe, is almost constantly. Your livelihood, your status, and the smooth functioning of the state all depend, in part, on the readiness of your simple reed pen and the richness of your ink. And preparing that pen is a skill in itself. You survived the schooling, you've got your palette, ink cakes, and precious papyrus. But before you can lay down a single hieroglyph or hieratic stroke, you need to prepare your main workhorse, the reed pen. This isn't like pulling a pen from a box. It's a small, manual craft in itself, one you'll perform countless times throughout your career, often several times a day. Your bundle of reeds, the Juncus maritimus, lies ready. They look like simple hollow stalks, maybe as thick as a pencil, or a little thinner, ranging in length. Now you select one. You feel its texture, maybe bend it slightly to check its flexibility. You're looking for a good piece, not too brittle, not too soft. The process of turning this raw reed into a writing instrument is surprisingly low-tech, yet requires a delicate touch. Unlike the later quill pens used in medieval Europe, which were cut to a sharp point and split nib, the ancient Egyptian reed pen worked more like a tiny brush. You take your chosen reed, maybe 20 to 25 centimeters long, and you wouldn't carve a sharp point. Instead, you'd prepare one end by chewing or fraying it. Yes, you heard that right, you use your teeth. You gently chew on one end of the reed, softening the fibers, until the very tip begins to separate and fray into a small, brush-like cluster of filaments. It sounds odd, doesn't it? Imagine your job required you to constantly chew on sticks. It's probably not great for your dental plan, if you had one, but it was the standard practice for millennia. Once the tip is sufficiently softened and frayed, you might use a small, sharp knife, perhaps a flint blade or a bronze one if you're lucky, to trim the very end of the frayed tip flat. This creates a tiny, dense brush head. Then, you might carefully split the very center of that brush head with the knife, just a millimeter or two deep. This split helps the ink flow down into the tip and allows for slightly finer lines and better control. It's a subtle difference, but crucial for forming neat signs. The width of this brush-like tip dictates the thickness of your lines. For broad, sweeping strokes in hieratic, you might leave it a bit wider. For fine, detailed hieroglyphs on a small amulet or tomb wall, you'd chew and trim it to a much finer point. Historians still argue whether the primary method for preparing the tip was purely chewing and fraying, or if tools like knives were used more extensively from the start to split and shape the fibers before chewing. Surviving pens show evidence of both chewing and cutting. Perhaps it depended on the scribe, the era, or the specific task. What is clear is that the end result was a flexible, fibrous tip designed to hold ink within its structure and release it gradually onto the writing surface, much like a small paintbrush. This is a mainstream historical fact, Egyptian scribes used reed brushes, not pointed quills. This preparation process is something you do constantly throughout the day. As you write, the delicate reed tip wears down against the fibrous papyrus or the rough surface of ostraca. It loses its shape, the split might close, or the fibers might become clogged with dried ink. When this happens, your lines become thick, uneven, or the ink flow becomes inconsistent. You can't just keep going. You stop, pick up your knife, and trim the end, or perhaps chew on it again to refresh the brush. It's a manual recalibration, a necessary pause in the flow of work. Imagine having to sharpen your pencil every few sentences, but instead of a sharp point, you're trying to maintain a tiny, chewable brush. You learn to do this quickly, almost without thinking. Your fingers manipulate the reed and the knife with practiced ease. The smell of the freshly cut reed is faint but distinct, a natural scent mingling with the dust and ink. You might keep several pens ready, some sharpened for different tasks, but inevitably, the one you are currently using will need attention. It's a small, repetitive task, but it's fundamental. A dull pen means sloppy work, and sloppy work is unacceptable. Your status and livelihood depend on the neatness and accuracy of your writing. It's like a modern surgeon constantly needing to ensure their instruments are perfectly sharp and clean, except your instrument is a stick you chewed on. There's a quirky tidbit about this process. Some depictions and surviving palettes include a small grinding stone or a piece of abrasive material embedded near the inkwells. While often interpreted as being for grinding pigments, some scholars suggest these might also have been used for lightly abrading the reed tip to help create or refine the brush fibers, perhaps in conjunction with or instead of chewing. It's not definitively proven, but the idea of using a tiny grinding surface on your pen tip adds another layer to the meticulousness. The flexibility of the reed tip is key to the distinct look of Egyptian writing. Unlike the uniform width of lines produced by a later split-nib pen, the reed brush allowed for variation in line thickness depending on the pressure applied and the angle of the stroke. You could create thick downstrokes and finer cross strokes within the same sign, giving the writing a dynamic, almost calligraphic quality. This skill, controlling the line weight with your simple reed brush, was something honed over those brutal years of schooling, filling ostraca with countless practice signs. So, as you sit down to begin your day, you don't just dip a pen and start writing. You select a reed, you chew or trim the tip, you split the center, you test it on a scrap piece of papyrus or an ostrakhan to ensure the ink flows correctly and the lines are clean. Only then, when your instrument is perfectly calibrated, do you begin the serious work. This constant act of preparation and maintenance makes you intimately connected to your tools. They aren't just inanimate objects. They are extensions of your hand, requiring care, attention, and regular renewal. It's a quiet ritual that centers you before you dive into the administrative chaos or the sacred silence of the temple. The simple reed, transformed by your skill and your teeth, is ready to make its mark on history, one stroke at a time. Your reed pen is crafted, its fibrous tip ready to hold and distribute ink like a tiny, organic brush. But a ready pen is just potential. It's useless without the pigment that brings the words to life on the page. This is where the ink comes in, those two essential colors housed in the wells of your wooden palette, the deep, administrative black and the vibrant, highlighting red. These aren't just dyes. They are durable compounds, mixed with ancient recipes that have stood the test of time, literally etched onto papyrus that has survived millennia. Let's start with the workhorse, the black ink. This was the standard color for most written material: letters, accounts, literary texts, administrative documents, everything that wasn't a heading or a correction. Its composition was elegantly simple but incredibly effective. The primary ingredient was carbon, essentially soot. This wasn't just any soot. It was carefully collected, often scraped from the bottoms of cooking pots or gathered from controlled burning processes designed to produce a fine, pure carbon powder. This raw soot was then ground down even further, often on a stone's surface with a pestle, until it was an incredibly fine, smooth pigment. Imagine grinding charcoal dust by hand for hours just to get enough ink for a few scrolls. It was laborious, dirty work, but essential for a smooth writing experience. Once the carbon powder was ready, It needed a binder to hold the pigment particles together and allow them to be mixed with water and adhere to the papyrus fibers. The binder of choice was almost universally gum arabic, a natural resin harvested from acacia trees, which grew widely in Egypt and surrounding regions. This gum, when dissolved in water, created a sticky, viscous liquid. The carbon powder was mixed with this gum arabic solution, often in precise ratios that were likely closely guarded recipes within scribal workshops. This mixture was then formed into small cakes or pellets and left to dry. You keep these dry cakes in the wells of your palate. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian black ink was made from carbon pigment mixed with gum arabic and water. It's why their writing lasted so long. Carbon is incredibly stable. Your grocery list, if written in Egyptian black ink, might literally outlast your house. The other crucial color is red. This wasn't just for decoration, it had specific functions in the scribal world. You'd use red ink for titles of sections, the beginning of new paragraphs, marking important names or dates, highlighting errors made by a student, a comment cite on ostraca, or sometimes for writing magical words or divine names in religious texts. It added structure and emphasis to the often dense lines of hieratic script. Red ink was made using red ochre, a naturally occurring pigment composed of iron oxides. Red ochre deposits were found in various locations across Egypt, yielding different shades of red depending on the impurities present, from a bright reddish-orange to a deep, earthy maroon. Like the carbon black, the red ochre was ground into a fine powder, then mixed with gum arabic and water and formed into cakes. So, you have these two dry cakes of pigment and binder in your palette. How do you turn them into liquid ink ready for your pen? This is where your water pot comes in. You dip the brush-like tip of your prepared reed pen into the water, just enough to wet the fibers. Then you rub the wet tip onto the surface of the dry ink cake in your palette's well. As the water from the pen touches the cake, it reconstitutes the pigment and gum binder, turning it back into a thick, paint-like liquid. You work the pen tip on the cake, picking up enough ink until you get the desired consistency. Too thick, and the ink won't flow smoothly. Too thin, and it will bleed on the papyrus. You learn to judge the perfect amount of water and rubbing through practice, years and years of practice. It's a small, repetitive action that becomes second nature, a quiet part of the rhythm of your day. The smell of the ink becomes familiar. Carbon black has a faint, almost sooty smell. Red ochre can smell a bit earthy, like damp clay. Mixed with the subtle, slightly sweet scent of gum arabic and the dampness of the reed and water, these smells are the background aroma of your working life. It's a quirky tidbit, perhaps, that the scent of your office is defined by ground minerals and tree sap, but it's true. You become attuned to these sensory details. The way the ink feels on the pen, the sound it makes on the papyrus, its subtle scent, they are all part of the meticulous process. Maintaining the right ink consistency is a constant micro-task. As you write, water evaporates from the ink cakes, especially in the dry Egyptian heat. You might need to add a drop or two of water to the wells periodically, re-wetting the cakes to keep the ink flowing freely. It's a balancing act. Too much water and the ink is too thin, too little and it's thick and gluggy, refusing to release from the pen tip smoothly. This isn't like modern liquid ink that stays ready in a bottle. You are constantly, actively involved in preparing and maintaining your working supply. Historians still argue whether the precise ratio of gum arabic to pigment was standardized across different scribal schools or workshops, or if it varied based on local tradition, the quality of the raw materials, or even the personal preference of the scribe or ink maker. Was there a best recipe, or did everyone just figure out what worked for them? We see variations in the quality and intensity of ink on surviving documents, which might suggest some inconsistency, but it's hard to know for sure without explicit ancient instructions. The process of mixing and using the ink reinforces the deliberate nature of Egyptian writing. There's no quick scribble. Every time you need more ink, you perform this small ritual of wetting the pen, rubbing it on the cake, and checking the consistency. It forces you to slow down, to be mindful of your materials and the task at hand. It's a physical connection to the words you are forming, a tangible link between the raw earth and plant materials and the abstract concepts taking shape on the papyrus. You are not just a copyist, you are an alchemist of sorts, transforming simple elements into the enduring stuff of history and administration, one carefully mixed stroke at a time. The ink is ready. The pen is ready. Now you just need the surface to write on, and that brings its own set of challenges and value. Okay, your reed pen is crafted, its fibrous tip ready to hold and distribute ink like a tiny, organic brush. You've mixed your black and red inks, carefully rubbing the wet pen onto the dry cakes in your palette until the consistency is just right. You're mentally prepared, your memory primed with the formulas and phrases you might need. Your toolkit is complete, assembled and ready for action. But all this preparation, all this skill, is meaningless without the surface upon which you will perform your craft. You need the paper of pharaohs, the writing surface that is as iconic as the pyramids themselves, papyrus. Forget everything you know about modern paper, made from wood pulp and chemicals. Papyrus is a completely different beast, both in its composition and its value. It wasn't cheap, easily mass-produced stuff you'd use for rough drafts or jotting notes. Oh no. Think of papyrus as the ancient equivalent of vellum or parchment, perhaps even more precious given the specific plant required and the labor involved in its creation. Using papyrus for practice was unheard of. That's what those rough, irregular ostraca were for. Papyrus was reserved for official documents, sacred texts, important letters, and literary works, anything intended to last and be seen. The source of this precious material is the papyrus plant itself, Cyperus papyrus, a tall, reedy sedge that once grew abundantly in the marshy areas along the Nile. Picture it now, dense thickets of green stalks, reaching several meters high, swaying gently in the river breeze. Harvesting these plants was the first step, and it was no easy task. You needed strong workers, often wading into the shallow waters or navigating small boats through the dense growth. The stalks were cut at the base, bundled up, and transported to workshops, likely located near the river where the plant grew and water was readily available. Once at the workshop, the painstaking process began. The tough, green outer rind of the stalk was peeled away, revealing the inner pith, a fibrous, somewhat spongy material. This pith was then cut lengthwise into thin strips, or fillets. This required a skilled hand. The strips needed to be as wide and as uniform as possible to create a smooth writing surface. Imagine trying to slice a celery stalk into perfectly even, paper-thin strips with a simple knife. It was meticulous, repetitive work, demanding patience and precision. You couldn't afford to waste material, not when the final product was so valuable. Next, these strips were laid out. This is where the magic, and the unique structure of papyrus, happens. The strips were arranged on a flat surface, usually a table or board, in 2 layers. The first layer of strips was laid out horizontally, side by side, slightly overlapping. Then, a second layer of strips was laid directly on top of the first, but running vertically, perpendicular to the lower layer. The natural sap within the papyrus plant, when moist, acted as an adhesive, binding the layers together. There might have been some debate, even in ancient times, about whether the strips needed to be soaked in water, and if so, for how long, or if a special kind of water, like Nile water, was best, to activate this sticky sap and make the strips pliable enough to press together effectively. Historians still argue whether the soaking process was a crucial step or varied depending on the freshness of the plant or local tradition. Once the 2 perpendicular layers were arranged, the whole assembly was placed under pressure. This was typically done by placing a heavy flat stone or a wooden press on top. The pressure squeezed out excess moisture and forced the plant fibers and sap to bond together, creating a single, strong sheet. After pressing, the sheets were left to dry, often in the sun, for several days. As they dried, the natural sap hardened, creating a durable bond. It was essentially a natural form of lamination, using the plant's own resources. But the sheet wasn't ready for writing yet. The surface was still rough and uneven from the pressing and drying process. So, the dried sheets were carefully smoothed and polished. This was done by rubbing the surface with a smooth object, like a rounded stone, a piece of shell, or even a piece of ivory. This polishing compressed the fibers and created a smoother, less absorbent surface, ideal for the fine lines of a reed brush. It also gave the papyrus a characteristic sheen. Imagine rubbing a stone over paper to make it smoother. Sounds tedious, right? It was. This entire process, from harvesting the plant to polishing the sheet, was incredibly labor-intensive, requiring many hands and considerable skill, which is a mainstream historical fact contributing significantly to papyrus's high cost. The finished product was a flexible, yellowish or brownish sheet, relatively light but strong. Individual sheets were often joined together along their edges using a paste made from flour and water, creating long rolls or scrolls. These scrolls could be quite long, sometimes many meters in length, allowing for extensive texts like religious rituals or historical chronicles. Handling a fresh roll of papyrus is a distinct experience. It has a unique texture, a subtle rustle as it's unrolled, and a faint, earthy smell, perhaps reminiscent of hay or dried grass. It's a far cry from the bleached, scentless paper you use today. The sheer effort involved in producing papyrus meant it was a commodity of significant value. It wasn't like buying a cheap notebook. Acquiring papyrus was a considerable expense. This scarcity influenced everything about scribal practice. It's why you practiced on cheap ostraca. It's why every available space on a sheet was used, with narrow margins and dense lines of text. It's why mistakes on papyrus were serious. You couldn't just throw away a sheet and start over easily. You'd have to carefully scrape away the ink with a damp cloth or knife, a process that often left a visible smudge and weakened the papyrus fibers. Imagine your boss getting mad because you used too many sticky notes. Now imagine that sticky note cost a week's wages. That was papyrus. It's a quirky tidbit that the plant Cyperus papyrus, so fundamental to Egyptian civilization and writing, is now virtually extinct in the wild within Egypt itself, though it's cultivated elsewhere. The very source of their paper is largely gone from the landscape it defined. It makes the surviving papyrus documents even more precious, tangible links to a plant and a process that shaped history. So, as you unroll a fresh sheet of papyrus, or carefully select a section from a larger roll, you're not just handling a writing surface. You're interacting with the end result of a complex, labor-intensive manufacturing process that began in the Nile marshes. You're holding something valuable, something that represents significant effort and cost. Every stroke of your reed pen on this fibrous surface feels deliberate, important. This isn't a casual act. This is writing on the paper of pharaohs, a surface worthy of preserving knowledge, recording history, and managing an empire. The sun is rising higher, casting long shadows across your workspace. The papyrus is ready. The day's work truly begins now. As the sun begins its slow, deliberate climb above the eastern horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pinks, oranges, and eventually that blinding Egyptian gold, your body stirs. There are no alarm clocks here, no snooze buttons. Your internal clock, perhaps aided by the first faint sounds of the city or village coming to life, or the changing quality of the light filtering through the simple window opening, signals the start of the day. You're a scribe. Your day begins early, often before the heat becomes truly oppressive. There's work to be done, and the light is best in the cool hours of the morning. You push yourself up from your sleeping mat, perhaps made of woven reeds, feeling the stiffness in your joints from another night spent on a firm surface. There's no comfortable mattress, no fluffy duvet. Life is practical, functional, geared towards getting things done. The air is still relatively cool, carrying the freshness of the receding night, perhaps mixed with the faint smell of wood smoke from early morning fires or the earthy scent of the nearby Nile. You perform your simple ablutions, maybe a quick splash of water from a stored pot to wash your face and hands. Your clothing is simple, a plain linen kilt for men, a linen dress for women, practical and light for the climate. There's no elaborate dressing ritual, just getting ready to be functional. Food this early is minimal, perhaps a piece of bread left over from the previous day, maybe a few dates or figs if you're lucky. The main meals come later. Your focus isn't on leisure or luxury, it's on preparing for the mental and physical demands of the hours ahead. Your toolkit, the palette with its drying cakes, The bundle of reeds, the water pot, your precious roll of papyrus, is likely stored carefully nearby. Perhaps it was packed away last night to protect it from dust, insects, or the stray paw of a domestic animal. Now you retrieve it. This is a small, familiar ritual. You check the state of your ink cakes. Are they still relatively moist, or have they dried out overnight? You select a few reeds, perhaps preparing one or two fresh ones by chewing and trimming the tips, just as you practiced countless times in school. You fill your water pot if it's empty. You unroll a section of papyrus, carefully smoothing it out, feeling its unique texture, remembering the effort that went into creating this valuable surface. It's a quiet preparation, a gathering of your essential resources before the real work begins. This early morning period is often a time of focused calm before the bustle of the day truly takes hold. It's when you might review the tasks ahead in your mind, that list of grain deliveries to record, the letter to draft for your superior, the passage from a religious text to copy onto a tomb wall. You might mentally rehearse formulas or recall specific signs needed for the day's work. Your mind, honed by years of rigorous training, is already shifting into work mode, transitioning from the subconscious state of sleep to the sharp, precise focus required for scribal duties. It's like your brain is booting up its ancient operating system, ready to process information. One mainstream historical fact is that the daily rhythm of life in ancient Egypt was heavily dictated by the sun. Workdays typically began at sunrise and ended near sunset, making the early morning hours particularly valuable for tasks requiring good light and concentration, especially intricate writing. There were no candles or lamps for detailed work like writing on papyrus. The flickering light wasn't suitable for precision. So, catching the best natural light was crucial. This meant that even if your office was indoors, it needed to be positioned to make the most of the sun's movement throughout the day. There's a quirky tidbit about ancient Egyptian timekeeping that ties into this. They used sundials and water clocks, but their hours weren't fixed lengths like ours. The length of an hour varied with the seasons, meaning summer hours were longer during the day than winter hours. This highlights how their lives, including the workday, were intimately connected to the natural cycles of the sun and the Nile. Imagine having to adjust your schedule every few weeks because the length of an hour kept changing. It certainly adds another layer to the meticulous aspect of their daily grind. Historians still argue whether the early morning hours were specifically designated for certain types of scribal work, like copying sacred texts which might require particular reverence and focus, or if it was simply the most practical time to begin any task before the heat and activity of the day peaked. Was there a specific morning routine prescribed for scribes, or did it vary widely based on their position and location? It's hard to say definitively, but the emphasis on starting early is clear from depictions of daily life. As the light strengthens, you might hear the sounds of others beginning their day, the distant lowing of cattle, the chatter of neighbors, the calls of vendors setting up in the market, the rhythmic pounding of grain in mortars. If you live within a temple complex or administrative building, you'll hear the specific sounds of that environment coming to life. The murmur of priests, the shuffling of sandals, the distant clang of tools. These sounds are the backdrop to your focused preparation, a reminder that the wider world is waking up and its demands will soon reach you. You take a moment to test your chosen pen. You dip the chewed, brush-like tip into the water, then rub it carefully onto the surface of the black ink cake on your palette. You work it gently, reconstituting the dry pigment and binder, watching as the deep black liquid forms. You try a few strokes on a scrap piece of astrakhan or a practice board. How does the ink flow? Is the consistency right? Is the pen tip holding and releasing the ink smoothly? You might adjust the water slightly or trim the pen tip again if needed. This small act of calibration is essential. A pen that scratches or ink that blobs will make the painstaking work of writing even more difficult and prone to error. It's like a musician tuning their instrument before a performance. The red ink gets the same treatment, though you'll use it less frequently. You wet a different part of your pen, or perhaps use a dedicated pen for red, and work it onto the red ochre cake. Its earthy, reddish hue appears, ready to mark headings or highlight important passages. Your palette, now holding wet ink in its wells and a few prepared pens in its groove, feels complete, ready for action. It's a small piece of order in a potentially chaotic world, a symbol of your readiness. You gather your materials. The papyrus roll is tucked under your arm or placed carefully on your lap or a low table. Your palette is in your hand, the water pot within easy reach. You might carry a small bag or bundle containing your reserve reeds, knife, and perhaps a bit of food for later. You are a portable office, ready to set up shop wherever your duties call you. The simplicity of your gear is deceptive. It contains everything necessary for your highly specialized work. As the sun fully clears the horizon, the air warms rapidly. The cool morning is quickly becoming a memory. The sounds of the day intensify. It's time to leave the quiet preparation space, whether that's a corner of your home or a designated spot in a larger building, and head to where the day's actual work will take place. You step out, perhaps into a courtyard, a bustling street, or towards the grand entrance of a temple or administrative complex. The world of ancient Egypt is waiting, and it needs its scribes. Your morning ritual is complete. You are equipped, prepared, and ready to face the meticulous grind that lies ahead. The question is, where will that grind take you today? The sun is fully up now, casting strong, defined shadows. You step out from your private space, your toolkit secured. Your office isn't a single, fixed room, remember? It's wherever your duties call you, a concept that would probably give a modern office worker hives. There's no dedicated desk with your name on it, no personal cubicle. Your workspace is defined by the few items you carry, capable of being deployed wherever needed across the vast landscape of Egypt. Today, where does the reed pen take you? Perhaps you walk towards the towering stone walls of a temple complex. The air here feels different, cooler within the shaded courtyards, perhaps carrying the faint, sweet smell of incense used in morning rituals. The sounds are muted compared to the bustling city outside, the soft shuffle of sandaled feet, the low murmur of priests chanting or discussing temple affairs, the distant clang of a metal door or the rhythmic sound of a sistrum from a ceremony. Your office might be a quiet corner of a hypostyle hall, the massive columns dwarfing you, or perhaps a small, open-air courtyard within the complex. Here, your work might involve copying sacred hymns onto new papyrus rolls, transcribing temple inventories of offerings and treasures, or recording the details of religious festivals and rituals. The atmosphere is one of reverence and tradition. You work carefully, the silence broken only by the gentle scratch of your pen and the occasional adjustment of your papyrus roll. Errors here are not just administrative mistakes. They could be seen as offenses against the gods themselves. No pressure, right? It's like doing your taxes while simultaneously trying not to offend a deity. Or maybe your path leads you towards a large, sun-baked mud brick building in the city, an administrative center. The atmosphere shifts dramatically. Here, the air buzzes with activity. The smells are of dust, sweat, perhaps the faint scent of animals from nearby markets, and the ever-present earthy smell of mud brick. The sounds are louder, more chaotic. The constant chatter of voices, the sharp commands of overseers, the shuffling feet of people coming to pay taxes, register complaints, or seek judgments. Your office is likely a bench or a low stool in a busy room or courtyard, surrounded by other scribes, officials, and petitioners. You might be recording court proceedings, drafting official letters from governors or viziers, tallying tax receipts, grain, livestock, linen, whatever the people owe, or managing lists of workers for state projects. This is the bureaucratic heart of Egypt, and you are one of its vital arteries. The pace is faster, the demands more immediate. You need to work efficiently, keep your wits about you amidst the noise, and ensure accuracy in the constant flow of information. It's the ancient equivalent of a busy government office, minus the fluorescent lights and questionable coffee. Then there's the possibility your work takes you out of the city altogether, into the fields or along the riverbanks. This is perhaps the most physically challenging office of all. Your workspace is under the relentless Egyptian sun, with little shade except for a hastily erected awning or the shadow of a wall. The air is hot, dry, and filled with fine dust that seems determined to settle on your precious papyrus and clog your ink. The sounds are the sounds of the land, the braying of donkeys, the bleating of sheep, the calls of farmers, the splash of water from irrigation ditches, the buzz of flies attracted to everything, including, occasionally, your ink. You might be here to measure land after the Nile's inundation recedes, assessing how much arable land is available for taxation. You could be counting livestock for census purposes, overseeing the collection of grain harvests, or supervising the transport of goods along the river. Your tools might be set up on a portable stool or even directly on the ground, your body hunched over the papyrus to shield it from wind and sun. This is definitely not a climate-controlled environment. You are battling the elements while trying to maintain the precision of your craft. Imagine trying to fill out forms in a dust storm while being dive-bombed by insects. Fun times. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian scribes is that their work locations were incredibly diverse, reflecting the central role of literacy and record-keeping in every aspect of Egyptian society, from religious rituals to agricultural management and state administration. You weren't just stuck in one building, you were deployed wherever the written word was needed. There's a quirky tidbit about working outdoors. Some depictions show scribes working under lightweight awnings or temporary shelters. While simple, these structures were crucial for providing shade and a slight barrier against the wind and dust, highlighting the practical adaptations needed to perform meticulous work in a harsh environment. It wasn't much, but it was your portable, ancient equivalent of an office umbrella. Historians still argue whether scribes tended to specialize heavily early in their careers, perhaps staying primarily within temple administration or state bureaucracy, or if many scribes were generalists expected to be competent in a wide range of tasks and locations as needed by their patrons or the state. Did a scribe who worked in the fields ever switch to copying religious texts, or were these distinct career paths? The evidence is often ambiguous, leaving room for debate on the degree of specialization within the scribal profession. Regardless of your specific location on any given day, the quiet reverence of a temple, the bustling noise of an administrative office, the challenging environment of the fields, your core tools remain the same: your palette, your pens, your water, your papyrus. They are your anchor, your constant in a world where your physical workspace is constantly shifting. You learn to adapt, to find a stable surface, to shield your work from the elements, to focus your mind amidst distractions. The sounds, smells, and sights of your office change, but the meticulous grind of transforming thoughts and facts into enduring ink on papyrus remains the same. You are the vital link, the record keeper, wherever the state or temple requires your services. And now that you're set up, wherever that is today, the actual work begins. What kind of work will fill these hours? Today, let's imagine your journey takes you to the bustling heart of Egyptian bureaucracy. You've left the quiet reverence of the temple or the challenging openness of the fields behind, and now you find yourself amidst the controlled chaos of an administrative building. Picture a large, mud-brick structure, maybe several stories high in parts, with narrow entrances and small windows designed to keep out the worst of the sun and heat. The air inside is warmer than the cool morning air you started with, thick with the scent of dust, the faint smell of sweat from the dozens of people crammed into the space, and yes, the familiar, comforting smell of your own ink. The sounds here are a constant hum, the low murmur of conversations, the shuffling of sandals on packed earth floors, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of other scribes working, and the sharp, impatient voices of officials giving orders. This is where the gears of the Egyptian state truly turn, powered by paper, or rather, papyrus, and the meticulous work of scribes like you. Your workspace is likely not a private room. You're probably seated on a low stool or cross-legged on the floor, sharing a large room or courtyard with many others. Your palette sits on your lap or a small, portable stand. Your papyrus roll is spread out before you, weighted down at the edges with stones or chunks of clay to keep it from curling up or being disturbed by errant breezes or elbows. You are part of a larger machine, a cog in the vast administrative apparatus that kept Egypt running for thousands of years. This is the power of paperwork, ancient style. What kind of tasks fill your day in this setting? The list is almost endless, covering every facet of state management. You might be recording the incoming taxes, not just money, of course, but grain from the harvest, livestock, linen, oil, metals, everything that flowed from the land and its people into the pharaoh's treasury or the temple storehouses. This requires careful tallying, using those arithmetic skills you honed back in school. You're translating bushels of wheat or herds of cattle into neat columns of numbers and hieratic signs on a scroll. Imagine doing a nation's taxes, but instead of a computer program, you have a reed brush and dried ink. And the taxpayers are bringing in actual goats. Hope you're not allergic. You could be drafting official letters and decrees from high-ranking officials, the vizier, the overseer of the granaries, the chief tax collector. These need to be written clearly, formally, and without error. You're the voice of authority, translated onto papyrus. You might be recording court proceedings, documenting disputes over land ownership, criminal matters, or contractual disagreements. Every word spoken by witnesses and judges needs to be captured accurately, a permanent record for future reference. This is the ancient equivalent of being a court reporter, but instead of a stenotype machine, you have your trusty reed pen. And the proceedings might involve angry farmers and stern officials who don't appreciate waiting while you resharpen your pen. Another common task is managing lists and registers. Lists of workers assigned to state projects, pyramid building, temple construction, quarrying expeditions. Lists of provisions distributed to these workers. Inventories of goods and storehouses. Census records, tracking the population, households, and resources. Every person, every animal, every sack of grain, every roll of linen, it all needed to be counted, recorded, and tracked. This was the backbone of Egyptian administration, enabling the state to mobilize resources, plan projects, and ensure everyone paid their dues. It's like managing the world's largest spreadsheet, updated daily by hand. And woe betide you if you miscount a shipment of grain. That could lead to shortages, unrest, and serious trouble for you. The pace can be relentless. Officials bark instructions, messengers arrive with new documents to be copied or summarized, people queue up seeking information or submitting petitions. You have to maintain your focus amidst the noise and pressure, keeping your hands steady, your mind sharp, and your pen flowing. You learn to filter out the distractions, creating a bubble of concentration around your workspace, broken only by the sound of your own careful work. It's a testament to the discipline instilled during those years of training. One mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian scribes and administration is their crucial role in enabling the centralized control and efficient management of a complex agrarian economy and a vast kingdom. Without their meticulous record-keeping, the state could not have collected taxes effectively, organized large-scale labor projects, or maintained its hierarchical structure. They were the indispensable administrators who made the pharaoh's power a tangible reality across the land. There's a quirky tidbit about administrative scribes, surviving ostraca, those broken pottery shards used for practice, from administrative sites often include quick notes, calculations, or even doodles alongside practice texts. This suggests that even in formal settings, scribes used these cheap scraps for quick thoughts or rough work before committing things to precious papyrus, or perhaps just to relieve boredom during repetitive tasks. Imagine finding a tiny sketch of a grumpy official on a tax receipt fragment from 300 years ago. Historians still argue whether the administrative scribal system was truly meritocratic, allowing individuals from humble backgrounds to rise based purely on skill and dedication, or if family connections and patronage played a more significant role in securing desirable administrative positions. While the texts emphasize the superiority of the scribal profession and the opportunities it offered, it's unclear how often someone without connections could truly climb the highest bureaucratic ladders. Your palette, your pens, your ink, your papyrus, they are the tools of your bureaucratic power. You are transforming the tangible reality of the Egyptian state, its wealth, its resources, its people, into abstract symbols on a scroll. You are creating the official memory of the kingdom, the records that will be stored and consulted for years to come. The accuracy of your work directly impacts the lives of farmers, laborers, and even officials. A misplaced zero in a tax record, an incorrectly copied decree, a forgotten entry in an inventory. These aren't just minor errors. They can lead to injustice, inefficiency, or chaos. The weight of responsibility is real, even if you're just sitting on a stool in a dusty room. You might work late, the fading light making the intricate signs harder to see, forcing you to squint and lean closer to the papyrus. Unlike temple scribes who might work by the light of lamps for specific rituals, administrative work relies heavily on natural light. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows through the small window openings, the pace might slow slightly. The sounds of the office begin to change as people prepare to leave. But your work isn't done until the last entry is made, the last calculation checked, the last document filed away, or rather, rolled up and stored. The constant need for accuracy and speed creates a unique kind of mental fatigue. You're not just copying, you're interpreting, calculating, organizing, and preserving information. It's a high-stakes mental game played out with humble tools on a valuable surface. The power you wield isn't physical, it's the power of information, controlled and disseminated through the written word. You are the gatekeeper of knowledge, the enabler of state control, the silent engine of Egyptian bureaucracy. As the day winds down in this busy office, you feel the familiar ache in your hand and back, the dryness in your throat from the dust, and the quiet satisfaction of another day's records meticulously created and preserved. You leave the clamor and dust of the administrative office behind. Your path today takes you to a different kind of space, one charged with a different kind of energy, the quiet, imposing realm of the temple complex. The air here feels cooler, less thick with the smells of the city, carrying instead the faint, sweet scent of incense that lingers from morning rituals. The sounds are muted, the soft shuffle of sandaled feet on stone floors, the low murmur of priests, perhaps the distant, rhythmic sound of a sistrum or a chant echoing from a hidden sanctuary. This is the domain of the sacred, and you, the scribe, have a vital role to play within its ancient walls. Your office here isn't a bustling room full of administrators, but perhaps a quiet corner of a shaded courtyard, a small room opening onto a hypostyle hall, or even perched precariously on scaffolding within a tomb chamber. In this setting, your work shifts from the immediate, transient needs of state bureaucracy to the eternal, unchanging demands of the divine and the afterlife. You are the keeper of sacred knowledge, the one who translates the will of the gods and the rituals required to maintain cosmic order into enduring form. Your papyrus rolls here might contain hymns to Ammonius, prayers to Isis, descriptions of temple ceremonies, or lists of offerings for the gods. You copy ancient myths and wisdom literature, preserving the collective memory and moral code of your civilization. This isn't just transcription, it's an act of devotion, a participation in the sacred rhythm of Egyptian life. The precision required is even greater here, for errors in a ritual text could have cosmic implications, disrupting the delicate balance of Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony that governs the universe. No pressure, just ensuring the universe doesn't collapse because you misspelled a god's name. One of the most significant tasks for scribes in the sacred realm was the copying of funerary texts. Think of the famous Book of the Dead. Though that's a modern term, the Egyptians called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. These were not single, standardized books as we know them, but collections of spells, prayers, and instructions intended to guide the deceased through the perils of the underworld and ensure their safe passage to the afterlife. Families would commission scribes to write these texts on papyrus scrolls, which would then be placed in the tomb with the deceased, or inscribed directly onto tomb walls and sarcophagi. Copying these spells was a meticulous, highly important job. Each word, each sign, had to be perfect, for the fate of a soul might depend on it. Imagine the focus required, knowing that your neatness might literally help someone navigate trials by demons and judgment by Osiris. Makes proofreading your emails feel a little less stressful, doesn't it? Working within tombs presented unique challenges. Your office might be a dusty, dimly lit chamber, the air close and still, carrying the scent of stone and dried plaster. You might be working alongside artists and sculptors, transferring texts and scenes from papyrus drafts onto the walls, ready for carving or painting. While the carving and painting themselves might be done by specialized artisans, the scribe was often responsible for the initial layout, writing the hieroglyphs and drawing the outlines of the images that would fill the tomb. This required not just writing skill, but an understanding of composition and iconography. You might use your reed pen to draw guide lines or sketch out the hieroglyphs in black ink on the prepared wall surface before the carvers began their work. For this, you might use a different kind of ink, perhaps a temporary pigment that could be easily erased if you made a mistake on the wall itself, or a more permanent one if it was the final layer of text before painting. This dual role, working with both papyrus and tomb surfaces, required adaptability and a slightly different application of your core skills. A mainstream historical fact about scribes in the sacred realm is their indispensable role in the functioning of temples and funerary cults. They were responsible for documenting everything from the daily rituals and festivals to the vast economic resources controlled by the temples. They maintained inventories of temple treasures, recorded donations, managed the land owned by the temple estates, and crucially, preserved the religious knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries. Without scribes, the elaborate temple administration and the complex funerary practices that defined Egyptian religion simply could not have existed. Within the temple complexes, there were often institutions known as the House of Life. These weren't just libraries, but centers of learning, scriptoria, and potentially even places for healing and magical practice. This was where many religious and literary texts were copied, studied, and preserved. Your office might be within such a house of life, surrounded by stacks of papyrus scrolls, the air thick with the smell of aged papyrus and ink. Here, the work was focused on scholarship and preservation, painstakingly copying older texts onto new scrolls to prevent their loss, studying the ancient language and its nuances, perhaps even composing new hymns or literary works. It was a more academic environment than the bustling administrative office, demanding intense focus and scholarly rigor. There's a quirky tidbit about the House of Life. Some scholars believe these institutions also served as centers for creating magical texts and amulets, and possibly even housed medical knowledge, linking scribal work directly to practices aimed at influencing the physical and spiritual world. The scribe's pen, in this context, wasn't just a tool for recording, but potentially a tool for wielding power, inscribing words believed to have efficacy in healing or protection. Imagine your job description including magical text creation, alongside inventory management. Historians still argue whether access to the most sacred texts and the knowledge contained within the House of Life was restricted only to a select group of high-ranking scribes or priests, or if it was more widely available to any scribe attached to the temple. Was there a hierarchy of scribal knowledge within the sacred sphere, or were all temple scribes initiated into the same body of religious and magical texts? The surviving evidence is often fragmented, making it difficult to fully reconstruct the internal workings and accessibility of these ancient centers of learning. Working in the temple or tomb environment required a different mindset than the administrative world. The pace might be slower, more deliberate, allowing for the intricate detail required for hieroglyphs or carefully formed hieratic signs destined for eternity. The silence, broken only by the sounds of your own work and the distant temple activities, allowed for deep concentration. You were not just recording transactions, you were participating in a tradition that stretched back thousands of years, connecting the present moment to the mythical past and the eternal future. Your toolkit in this setting might include finer pens for detailed work, perhaps a wider variety of pigments if you were involved in decorating tomb walls, and certainly an abundance of high-quality papyrus or access to prepared wall surfaces. The value of the materials you worked on was often immense, reinforcing the need for absolute accuracy and care. A mistake on a ritual papyrus could render it useless. A mistake on a tomb wall was even worse, requiring laborious correction that might still leave a visible flaw. As the day progresses in the quiet, cool temple courtyard or the still air of a tomb chamber, you feel the familiar ache in your hand, the slight stiffness in your neck from leaning over your work. But there's also a sense of profound purpose. You are not just documenting the transient world, you are contributing to the eternal. You are ensuring that the words of the gods are preserved, that the rituals are performed correctly, that the deceased have the knowledge they need for their journey. Your meticulous grind here is not just about efficiency, it's about reverence, accuracy, and continuity. You are a link in a chain of scribes stretching back to the very beginnings of Egyptian civilization, each one dedicated to preserving the sacred knowledge through the careful application of ink and reed pen. The sun begins to dip lower outside the temple walls, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Your work for the day in this sacred space is nearing its end, leaving behind words destined to endure. You've spent time in the hushed halls of the temple, surrounded by the weight of ancient tradition and sacred texts. You've navigated the noisy, demanding world of administrative bureaucracy, translating the flow of goods and people into neat lines on papyrus. But today, the demands of the state pull you away from the relative shelter of buildings and out into the vast, open landscape of Egypt. Your office is now the field itself, the sun-baked earth stretching towards the horizon, the endless blue sky above. The air here is different, hotter, drier, constantly carrying the fine, pervasive dust that gets into everything. The smells are of sun-baked earth, the faint, sweet scent of drying crops, the earthy smell of irrigation water, and the distinct aroma of livestock. The sounds are the sounds of rural life, the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the calls of farmers working the land, the splash of water in irrigation channels, the buzzing of flies that seem particularly determined to share your workspace. Why are you here, a skilled scribe, out in this physically demanding environment? Because the wealth of Egypt flows directly from the land, and the state needs to know exactly how much wealth there is to tax. Your job here is fundamental to the economic functioning of the kingdom, measuring the land, counting the resources, and assessing the dues owed to the pharaoh and the temples. This is ancient tax season, and you are the ancient equivalent of a combination surveyor, census taker, and meter reader, all rolled into one sun-scorched package. One of the most crucial times for a field scribe is after the annual Nile inundation recedes. The floodwaters deposit fertile silt across the land, but they also erase the boundaries between fields. Once the water is gone and the land is dry enough to walk on, teams of surveyors, often including scribes, go out to remeasure the fields and re-establish property lines. This isn't just a matter of helping farmers. It's about ensuring the state knows exactly how much arable land each farmer has, because taxes are often based on land area and expected yield. You'd work alongside rope stretchers, individuals who used knotted ropes to measure distances, a surprisingly accurate method when done correctly. Your role is to record the measurements, calculate the area using basic geometry, skills you definitely learned the hard way back in school, and update the land registers. Imagine trying to do geometry problems while battling heat stroke and keeping your papyrus from blowing away. Makes calculating tip on your phone feel pretty easy, doesn't it? Beyond land measurement, you're also involved in assessing agricultural output and counting livestock. As the crops ripen or are harvested, you might visit fields to estimate yields, determining how much grain or other produce a farmer is likely to bring in. You'd visit farms and villages to count cattle, sheep, goats, and other animals. Livestock was a significant form of wealth and was also taxed. You record these numbers, compare them to previous year's records if you have them, and calculate the tax burden for each household or village. This requires a good eye, the ability to deal with farmers who might be less than enthusiastic about revealing their true wealth, and the mental agility to keep accurate tallies under pressure. Try counting a moving, noisy herd of sheep in 100-degree heat while swatting flies. It's character building, to say the least. Your workspace out here is rudimentary at best. You might have a portable stool to sit on, or you might simply work cross-legged on the ground. Your pallet sits on your lap or a low block. Your papyrus roll is spread out, but constantly threatened by the wind, which whips up that ever-present dust, and the sun, which glares off the surface and dries your ink alarmingly fast. You learn to position your body to cast a shadow over your work, creating a small, moving patch of shade as you adjust your position throughout the day. You might use stones or clods of earth to hold down the edges of your papyrus, hoping a sudden gust doesn't send your valuable document tumbling across the field. This constant battle with the elements adds a layer of physical difficulty to the already meticulous task of writing. A mainstream historical fact about scribes in the field is their essential role in enabling the highly centralized Egyptian economy, which relied on detailed records of land ownership, agricultural production, and livestock to assess and collect taxes effectively across the entire country. This system allowed the state to mobilize resources for massive projects and support its large administrative and religious institutions. There's a quirky tidbit about the rope stretchers who worked with scribes. These individuals, known as harpodonapti in Greek, were highly skilled, and their knotted ropes were calibrated to a standard unit of measurement. Some scholars believe they might have used techniques that bordered on practical geometry or even rudimentary surveying instruments alongside the ropes, highlighting the blend of practical skill and mathematical knowledge involved in land measurement. Historians still argue whether the tax assessments in the field were purely based on objective measurements and counts, or if scribes and local officials had significant discretion to negotiate or adjust assessments based on factors like personal relationships, local conditions, or even outright corruption. Was the system as rigidly fair as the official records might suggest, or was there more flexibility and potential for bias in the field? You carry your standard toolkit: palette, pens, water, papyrus, but perhaps with some additions. You might have extra water, not just for your ink, but for yourself in the scorching heat. You might have a small bag to protect your papyrus when you're moving between locations. You might even carry a lightweight awning or a piece of cloth to rig up some temporary shade. Your personal comfort is minimal. The priority is protecting the valuable documents and maintaining the integrity of your tools and ink. The physical act of writing in this environment is a challenge. Your hand aches from gripping the pen and maintaining control against the rough surface of the papyrus, especially when you're hunched over or working on an uneven surface. Your back and neck protest from being held in awkward positions to shield your work. Your eyes strain in the bright sun and the glare off the papyrus. And you have to do all this while keeping your mind sharp, ensuring you accurately record the numbers and names dictated by the surveyors or farmers. It's a test of endurance, both mental and physical. It's definitely not the kind of job you'd see advertised with work from home options. Despite the difficulties, there's a certain rhythm to the work out here. The cycle of the Nile, the growth of the crops, the movement of the herds, you are intimately connected to the agricultural heart of Egypt. You see the direct result of the inundation and the labor of the farmers, and you translate that tangible reality into the abstract language of state administration. You are the link between the physical world of the fields and the bureaucratic world of the city. Your work here is less about grand pronouncements or sacred rituals, and more about the fundamental necessity of feeding and funding the state. It's a dusty, demanding, but vital part of the scribe's daily grind, ensuring that every plot of land, every head of cattle, contributes its share to the prosperity of the kingdom. As the sun reaches its zenith, beating down relentlessly, you continue your meticulous work, one measurement, one count, one carefully formed sign at a time. Whether you're perched on a low stool in a dusty administrative office, kneeling on the ground in a sun-baked field, or sitting cross-legged in the quiet cool of a temple courtyard, the moment comes when you must translate thought into ink on papyrus. This is the physical act of writing, the core of your daily grind, and it's a demanding process that engages your entire body, not just your mind. Forget the effortless glide of a modern pen or the rapid tap of a keyboard. Writing in ancient Egypt with a reed brush requires precision, control, and a specific, often strenuous, posture. Imagine yourself now, finding your stable position. If you're indoors, you might be on a low stool, your knees bent, your palette resting on your lap or a small, portable stand. If you're outside, you might be sitting directly on the ground, perhaps on a mat or piece of cloth, your legs tucked beneath you or stretched out to the side. Your papyrus roll is spread out before you, unrolled to the section you're working on, held in place by weights or simply by the tension of your hand and the surface it rests on. One hand, usually your left, unless you were one of the rare ancient lefties, in which case, good luck fitting into a right-handed world, holds the papyrus steady, guiding it as you write or unrolling more as needed. Your dominant hand holds the reed pen. The way you hold the reed pen is crucial. It's not gripped tightly like a pencil. Remember, it's a brush, not a point. You hold it more delicately, often between your thumb and forefinger, supported by your middle finger, allowing for flexibility and control of the brush tip. Your hand doesn't just move back and forth. It performs a series of small, precise movements, pressing, lifting, twisting slightly, to create the varied strokes that make up each hieroglyphic or hieratic sign. It's a bit like painting miniature symbols, requiring a steady hand and fine motor control honed over years of practice. The angle at which you hold the pen, the pressure you apply, the speed of your stroke, all these factors influence the thickness and shape of the lines, and mastering them is what separates a clumsy amateur from a skilled scribe. The physical difference between writing hieratic and hieroglyphs impacts your posture and movement. Hieratic, the cursive script used for most daily tasks, is written from right to left in horizontal lines. It's faster, more fluid, designed for speed and efficiency. Your hand moves relatively quickly across the papyrus, forming ligatures, connecting signs, and abbreviated forms. This allows for a more continuous flow of movement. Hieroglyphs, on the other hand, used for formal inscriptions on tombs and temples, can be written in columns, either left to right or right to left, or in horizontal lines, usually left to right. They are more pictorial, more detailed, and require a more deliberate, slower pace. Each sign is carefully drawn, often with multiple strokes, demanding greater precision and control. Writing hieroglyphs is a more painstaking process, requiring intense focus on the individual sign rather than the flow of the line. Imagine the difference between quickly jotting a note and carefully drawing a detailed illustration. That's the physical distinction between writing hieratic and hieroglyphs. Maintaining the correct posture for hours on end is physically taxing. Sitting cross-legged or on a low stool forces your back to curve, putting strain on your lower spine. Leaning over your work to get closer to the papyrus and ensure accuracy strains your neck and shoulders. Your dominant hand and wrist ache from the constant, repetitive fine movements and the need to maintain a steady grip and consistent pressure. Hand cramps are a regular occupational hazard, a painful reminder of the physical demands of your supposedly non-manual labor. It's definitely not ergonomic by modern standards. There were no adjustable chairs or standing desks in ancient Egypt. Your posture was dictated by the need to be close to your work and stable enough to produce neat writing on often uneven surfaces. A mainstream historical fact is that the common depictions of scribes show them seated on the ground or low stools, often with their papyrus on their lap or a low table, confirming this physically demanding posture was standard for the profession. This wasn't just a casual way to sit, it was the necessary setup for using the reed pen effectively on a flexible writing surface like papyrus. The need for absolute focus adds another layer to the physical strain. You must block out distractions, the noise of the administrative office, the buzzing of flies in the field, the murmur of temple activity, and concentrate entirely on the signs you are forming. This mental effort, combined with the physical discomfort, creates a unique state of being. You are simultaneously deeply focused and acutely aware of the aches and pains in your body. It's like trying to thread a needle while holding your breath and balancing on one foot. The task requires intense concentration, but your body is constantly reminding you of its discomfort. There's a quirky tidbit that some depictions of scribes, particularly older ones, show a slight stoop or curvature of the spine, which some scholars interpret as a visual representation of the long-term physical impact of the scribal posture. While this isn't a universal feature in all depictions, it's plausible that decades of sitting hunched over papyrus would take a toll on a scribe's back. It's a subtle acknowledgement in art of the physical reality of the job. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of certain physical ailments among scribes, such as back problems or arthritis in the hands and wrists, was significantly higher than in other professions that also involved prolonged sitting or repetitive hand movements. While logic suggests the posture and work would lead to such issues, definitive medical evidence from ancient skeletons is hard to link specifically and exclusively to scribal work versus other activities involving similar physical demands. Despite the discomfort, you develop a rhythm. The dip of the pen in water, the rub on the ink cake, the movement across the papyrus, the pause to re-ink, these actions become almost automatic, a physical dance accompanying the mental process of writing. You learn to manage the pain, to shift your weight subtly, to stretch your fingers when you can, to find moments of relief without breaking your concentration. The desire for neatness and accuracy, drilled into you during those brutal years of schooling, overrides the physical protest of your body. You endure the strain because the work is important, because your livelihood depends on it, and because you take pride in producing clear, legible text. The surface you write on also plays a role in the physical experience. Papyrus, while smoother than ostraca, is still fibrous and has a texture. The reed pen doesn't glide effortlessly. There's a slight drag, a subtle resistance that you feel through your hand. Writing on prepared wall surfaces for tomb inscriptions can be even more demanding, requiring you to work vertically or even overhead, battling gravity and the rougher texture of plaster or stone. Each surface presents its own physical challenge, demanding slight adjustments in pressure and technique. As the hours pass, the ache intensifies. Your back screams, your neck is stiff, your hand feels like a claw. But you keep going. The scroll before you needs to be filled, the list completed, the letter drafted. You are a professional, and professionals endure. You might pause occasionally to stretch, to rub your aching hand, to take a sip of water, if you have any, but the work calls you back. The meticulous grind isn't just mental, it's a physical test of endurance, performed one careful stroke at a time, under the unyielding sun or in the dusty confines of an ancient office.